This is Understandable Politics. Hello! Today we will talk about a harsh political tradition in the USA, the assassination and attempts on high-ranking officials when bullets whiz by their heads. Look at what happened. Before the shooting at Trump, the USA had a lull since 1981. Back then, a lone gunman tried to kill President Reagan. But modern America as a whole is a large, bloody political trail. History here has repeatedly changed through violent means. We provide the facts, you draw the conclusions. Music. Titled by Dima Torzak. In 200 years, 4 American presidents have been killed, and there have been dozens of assassination attempts. Shots at 2 American leaders are considered to have changed the world. Let's start with one of those. On April 9, 1865, an important chapter in American internal history ended, the Civil War. The conflict between the Union of Northern States and the Confederacy of Southern States was won by the former, but at a high cost. About 2 million people died on both sides, roughly a third of them civilians.
The main outcome of that war was the addition of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolishing slavery. However, de facto it changed nothing, as racial segregation started almost immediately in the country. Blacks were relocated from whites to special zones or reservations.
But let's return to Lincoln. As a representative of the North, he led the USA after the South's capitulation. The politician planned to carry out large-scale industrialization and integrate black people into society. But everything changed because of my American cousin. Abraham Lincoln went to this play with his wife on April 14, 1865.
A supporter of the South, actor John Wilkes Booth, sneaked into the presidential box and shot Abraham Lincoln in the head. The next morning, without regaining consciousness, the president died. Millions of Americans came to pay their last respects to their president during the 2.5-week journey of the funeral train from Washington to Springfield. Lincoln's tragic death helped create an aura of martyrdom around his name, as someone who gave his life for the reunification of the country and the liberation of black slaves.
Later, it became known that the assassin wanted to kidnap the president and take him to the South for ransom.
After the conspirators' plans failed, Booth planned to kill 3 top leaders of the country, along with Abraham Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward, were also supposed to die. Booth's accomplices, Lewis Powell and David Harold, went to Seward. Seward was ill at the time, having been injured in a road accident and was at home. Powell managed to get into his room and even inflicted several knife wounds, but they were not fatal. George Atzerodt was responsible for the attempt on Vice President Andrew Johnson, but he immediately aroused suspicion among the hotel staff where Johnson was staying and was arrested.
In American history, there have been numerous attempts or assassinations of sitting U.S. presidents and even presidential candidates. Perhaps the most resonant was, of course, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln right after the Civil War, which actually led to a rather serious constitutional crisis in the USA, because his position was immediately taken by his vice president, a Northern Democrat. He halted the policy of reconstructing the Southern states, which intensified the contradictions between the South and the North, and even at one point brought America to the brink of a new civil war.
James Garfield is not so well known in our parts, and he was president for just over 8 months. The politician was also the last classic White House occupant. That's what they call those born in a log cabin. Many Americans lived that way back then.
Garfield was a Republican. At that time, the party was divided into two factions, the stalwarts and the half-breeds. Simply put, conservatives and liberals. The politician became a compromise figure, but his sympathies for the liberal wing bore bloody fruit.
Just moments after the president entered the waiting room of the train station, he was shot in the back. According to witnesses, Garfield managed to make eye contact with the assassin, who said, "I am a stalwart of the stalwarts." Arthur is now president. He meant Chester Arthur, the vice president, who indeed took over the country after Garfield's death. While receiving first aid, Garfield saw a crimson stain on his clothes and told the doctor working on him, "Alas, doctor, but I am already a dead man."
The politician began to recover, but the bullet remained in his back, which even the famous scientist Alexander Bell, the inventor of the telephone, could not remove. The president simply stopped paying attention to the lead in his body and suddenly died in September of that year. And what about the assassin? He was Charles Guiteau, a lawyer.
Guiteau disagreed with Garfield's election as president. The man had been planning to kill the politician for several months, but wanted to do it elegantly. So Guiteau bought an English bulldog revolver with an ivory handle. "I thought it would look better in a museum," the assassin later said during interrogation. On June 30th, 1882, Charles Guiteau was hanged.
This situation was one of those cases where his opponents had no other arguments except for the gun, except for the Colt. Unfortunately, such a tradition is very characteristic of the United States of America.
By the way, a similar fate awaited the 25th President of the USA, William McKinley. On September 6, 1901, he was shot at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo.
Disguising his hand with a bandage to hide the revolver, Cholgos shot McKinley twice at close range. The president died on September 14, 1901, from complications arising from the wounds.
And now we move on to the most famous assassination of the 20th century. These are perhaps some of the most famous frames in history. On November 22, 1963, the youngest U.S. President, John Kennedy, was shot. He was 46 years old at the time of his death.
On November 21st, Kennedy arrived in Texas to visit Governor John Connally, considered one of the most influential supporters of the sitting president. They visited San Antonio and Houston, and after a banquet, they headed to Dallas. On the morning of November 22nd, he took a seat in an open Lincoln, smiling broadly, along with his wife Jacqueline and the Texas governor. The motorcade set off through the city's streets. The Kennedys greeted the townspeople.
The first bullet hit the president in the neck, the second in the head. It was the first assassination of a country's leader broadcast live. All of America was watching the event in Texas. And the name of the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, became infamous.
About an hour after the shots at the U.S. President, Kennedy's assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, who had shot police officer Tippit in front of a crowd, was caught. Arrested, Oswald said at the police station that he had no lawyer and was being framed. On November 24th, Oswald was shot during his transfer to another prison by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. This recording was captured by dozens of TV cameras.
By the way, during his arrest, Oswald shouted that he was being framed, which even sparked a whole conspiracy movement.
In the USA, a popular theory is that Kennedy fell victim to a conspiracy by the Majestic 12 group. These were influential politicians and businessmen who controlled all the country's financial flows. In the same version in 1979, the House of Representatives committee leaned towards this theory.
Several reasons are cited. Kennedy began issuing treasury bills in the USA, thereby cutting off the influence of the Federal Reserve. And through it, the powerful of the world kept the planet on a leash. They controlled the printing presses. Secondly, the president was suppressing drug trafficking, threads of which led to the same top echelons. And thirdly, he was against sending troops to Vietnam.
The attempt to take control of the Federal Reserve System was essentially an attack on the hegemony of the United States. And at the same time, it meant the state would start taking control. That's why, in essence, Kennedy, one of the reasons was probably this. The second reason is, of course, the Vietnam War, which ultimately ended in disgrace for the United States. But still, the main thing is money. And money is the Federal Reserve System, a private structure that did not want to lose its control.
Senator Robert Kennedy was running for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1968. He won the California primary. In honor of this, he gave a speech in Los Angeles, but just after finishing, he was shot at close range by Palestinian Sirhan, receiving multiple bullets. After multiple wounds, Senator Kennedy died the next day. The sad tradition was started by the 7th U.S. President, Andrew Jackson. At the end of January 1835, painter Richard Lawrence, armed with 2 pistols, tried to kill Jackson near the Capitol. Both guns misfired.
Theodore Roosevelt also faced death, having served 2 terms as president. Intending to run for a 3rd term in 1912, he was campaigning when John Schrank shot him in the chest before his speech in Milwaukee. By a lucky chance, the bullet was slowed by a steel glasses case and a folded manuscript of his speech. This saved Roosevelt's life. The chest wound was minor. The politician even delivered his planned speech before seeking medical help.
Just 20 years later, Franklin Roosevelt would find himself in a dangerous situation. Shortly after taking office, he was targeted by an Italian immigrant. Several bullets missed him but fatally wounded the nearby mayor of Chicago.
American President Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts in his life. In both cases, the former head of the White House escaped unscathed. Attempts were also made on Harry Truman and presidential candidate George Wallace.
On March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan was leaving a hotel after his speech. The president was shot at 6 times from close range. One of the bullets hit, piercing his chest, hitting his left lung, and passing within an inch of his heart. Reagan was saved by a miracle. The bleeding politician was quickly taken to the hospital, and after surgery, he recovered from his wounds.
Of course, there have been periods of instability in American history when such attempts happened frequently, and periods of national unity and stability when it happened less often. Now, I think Americans are entering another period of instability, so we will see more and more political violence. Attacks, assassination attempts, and everything else. So here, I don't know, American institutions are failing to function properly, the political system is falling apart, and against this backdrop, of course, we see a surge of violence not only against ordinary citizens, but also against politicians and even presidential candidates.
The shooter was released in 2013 and still lives in Virginia, just like our next subject.
On May 10, 2005, during George W. Bush's speech at Freedom Square in Tbilisi, a Georgian citizen threw a grenade towards the stage, which did not explode by pure chance. For camouflage, it was tightly wrapped in a red sock, which delayed the detonation.
The accused, Vladimir Arutyunyan, declared himself insane after his arrest, triggering a series of medical examinations. Back in 2005, the criminal claimed he was aiming not at Bush, but at Saakashvili, who was the president. Arutyunyan was given a life sentence. By a cruel twist of fate, years later in 2021, Saakashvili himself would join him behind bars.
It was a demonstrative act of protest against the visit to Georgia by the leader of the side that wants to conquer Georgia and turn it into a colony.
And he repeatedly confirmed that if given the chance, he would do it all over again, exactly the same way.
It seems, if you haven't been shot at, you don't have a complete political career. Such are the American realities. Even Donald Trump has now had his baptism by fire. As is known, the billionaire's life was saved by a sharp turn of his head when he decided to look at the screen showing immigration numbers. The photo taken immediately after the shot is called the most significant in decades, and the blonde politician is already being predicted to win the election, although opponents call it all staged.
It's also striking that the attempt on Trump's life happened just weeks after the assassination attempt on Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. Both Trump and Fico stand out as some of the very few Western politicians who openly call for resolving the Ukrainian crisis through peaceful negotiations. For this, they are harshly criticized by Biden and other hawks. Recently, Trump met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who came to discuss his peace initiative for Ukraine, after which the former US president stated, "Peace is needed as soon as possible." And here's how the liberal outlet Axios.com presented their meeting. Trump's authoritarian allies plan a meeting. "If you try to stop World War III, they will kill you," commented political analyst Jackson Hinkle.
It's lively over there, no doubt. Thomas Crooks shot at Trump. Notably, US intelligence had noticed him an hour before the attempt. One of the snipers even added fuel to the fire by stating he had Crooks in his sights, but was ordered not to shoot. This stirred the public even more.
The shooter began to be called a brainwashed puppet of the Democrats. This was also fueled by an investment company, BlackRock commercial, in which the criminal appeared 2 years ago. Representatives of the world's richest corporation quickly distanced themselves from the shooter, stating their thoughts were with Trump. But it seems even the representatives of the Democrats' wallet didn't believe themselves.
Since his 2016 campaign, Trump has been painted as the embodiment of evil. Republican Senator J.D. Vance, who is predicted to be Trump's vice president, pointed out that this is not an isolated incident, reminding, "The central message of Biden's campaign was that Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs." This rhetoric directly led to the assassination attempt. Journalist Tucker Carlson expressed the opinion a month and a half ago that Trump will become president again if he isn't killed before then.
Will this latest violence sober up the local establishment? Unlikely. As we see, US history is woven from traditions of political assassinations. Political scientists are confident that in the 21st century, shootings will continue in the states. Each new election campaign in recent years has used increasingly dirty and harsh methods of fighting for high positions. Plus, a significant part of society is dissatisfied with both the elections and the work of politicians.
Not everyone is satisfied with the system of selecting political elites in America. Not everyone sees it as democratic and representing the interests of society. Even if we look at both candidates now, Biden and Trump, they have colossal disapproval ratings. Both are disliked by the majority of Americans, but the selection system is such that they won the primaries and are likely to make it to the elections.
So, that's a mix of murders, criminals, and various theories and assumptions. In this program, we focused on the personalities of politicians, but it's important to mention that Kennedy's assassination triggered the Vietnam War, resulting in millions of victims. Only God and the American elites know how much more blood is on the hands of those who manipulate such shooters. Goodbye.